Thank you. Okay, this is fun. It's actually quite a really nice sort of progression, I think, because we start with sort of retail banking and then sort of wealth and now the fun part. So I'm going to talk about investment banking, and usually this is the part people go, oh no, we're going to see charts and they're going to talk to us about price of oil and equity and all that. So that's not going to happen because I'm a designer. And what I want to do is basically share the last sort of 8 years of my life as a UX designer in Canary Wharf and sort of Bishopsgate, and kind of show some of the insights, some of the learnings. It's been quite a ride. Got quite a few scars underneath this sort of shirt that I'm going to sort of discuss as well. In terms of my journey so far, just to give you a bit of context, if that's some sort of semi-visible. So I started my sort of journey about 18 years ago in the dot-com days as a web designer. Was doing sort of flash banners and CD-ROMs and sort of websites and all that jazz. Got into sort of web development, front end, sort of back end, then sort of moved to the UK, studied sort of multimedia arts, got into kind of usability and human factors, basically get the UX bug. I think a lot of people sort of go into different sort of programs, maybe to do like a technical degree or a visual communications, and then they realize that there's this whole world that is very sort of multidisciplinary, very interesting, a bit of psychology and sort of sociology and cultural aspects. So that's where I got the bug. I was teaching UX and web development for about 5 years. I then, or during that period, came to City. I did my master's here. It was really sort of fun time. I'm sort of really glad I spent sort of those 2 years here. And then I was basically here for another sort of 2.5 years as a researcher, working with my mentor, Professor Neil Maiden. That was really, really cool and fun. But then the project sort of finished. My CV was basically academic, 9 years, and I had to go back to kind of the real world. So living drinks on a Friday and Monday trading floor in Canary Wharf. So that was pretty much the transition. So it was quite a shock, but been very sort of interesting. And I'm going to show you basically how I think that journey has helped me adapt and work in that reality. A bit of sort of, yeah, we'll get to that. So in terms of the last 8 years, I was at a company called Lab 49 for 7 years. And in January, I joined Capco, just to give you a bit of that. And that's the last sort of marketing spiel you're going to get from me. And the next slide. So we're based in Old Street, global company. We are a consultancy dealing with financial institutions. We basically work with the retail, commercial, the private banks, the wealth managers, and also investment banks. Capco Digital, which I'm a part of, basically has 3 capabilities: the design, the development, and delivery. So we're everywhere. We're everywhere in Canary Wharf and the city. There's always, if you kind of look for Capco people, they might be doing PMing, BA work, but also design, development, and delivery. And as trigger happy, we are hiring. So if anyone finds any of this interesting and you want us to talk about that, definitely have a chat afterwards. So I'm going to talk about 4 things. I'm going to give you a bit of an insight into investment banking, but really high level, trust me. If you want to know more, go and read Investopedia and buy the books. This is really from a design perspective. And then really talk you through the 3 key sort of stages of design, right? You do the research, you start concepting and taking sticky notes and come up with ideas, and then you have something which is more of a mature proposition that you want to maybe sort of finesse, and obviously you have to work on. And that's going to be really the focus. In terms of investment banking, this is, again, projector is not that great, but we'll make do. So like I said, this is a really nice flow for this evening, I think. If you look at sort of retail, commercial banking, everything that was discussed, right? Sort of mortgages, loans, current accounts, and so on. Wealth management, again, sort of private banking, managing investment portfolios, whether you're just saving for your retirement or whether you're a super rich footballer that needs to manage his money. And then you've got investment banking, right? And I think, that kind of visual of all those monitors and all that screen, that basically what greeted me on that sort of Monday in sort of Canary Wharf. And basically the reaction, and for someone that spent so much time in academia and doing sort of user testing and observations, this was heaven. If you think about, if you're a curious person, if you're a person that's curious about how people interact with technology, if you constantly think about the limitations, the opportunities, about the data visualization, how it can help, this is really the best place to be. In terms of what investment banking is, essentially we're looking at highly complex transactions between organizations, whether or not that is an investment bank to an investment bank, whether it's for investment purposes or business purposes, dealings with central banks, basically transferring huge amounts of money and equity for various reasons and purposes. The financial products are extremely complex. As we kind of talked about the financial crisis and how things are constructed, sometimes you have a whole team of people working out some deal that's going to last for 10, 20 years with cash flows and crazy, crazy things. These are some of the major players. I'm guessing, how many of you worked with some of these guys? Show of hands, yeah? So, okay, so yeah, these guys basically obviously are based in Canary Wharf and the city. And in terms of the projects that I'm going to talk about, the perception people have of kind of investment banking and kind of trading stocks is usually this. You kind of think about the Wolf of Wall Street and kind of all that sort of drama. You don't really have many of those. If you go to investment banking today, it pretty much looks like that. A lot of things have been computerized, digitized. All the trading is done electronically in many ways. In some cases, people still ring up the trader, whether it's a hedge fund or a business that needs to buy foreign exchange and so on. But ultimately, a lot of it is done on computers, which is amazing for us because those systems need to be designed, and they need to be designed well. In terms of the typical projects that I've encountered in investment banking, I would pretty much put them in 3 buckets. You got your sort of front office projects, which is basically where all the action is, all the kind of the traders and the sales and all the kind of the buy, sell, and all that jazz. Very kind of, I would say, high pressure, critical systems. We're looking at decisions that, if you press the wrong button, you just sold instead of buying $500 million yen for dollar, right? And that's a big, big deal. You can just, it's not like Amazon, you can go to my orders and cancel, right? There's huge repercussions for that. So it's something to sort of bear in mind. And front office, again, you're looking at trading platforms, very popular. When I joined Lab 49 in 2010, there was this sort of big sort of arms race. Everyone wanted to have a really sort of snazzy trading platform. They realized that there's huge benefits in designing them well so people can get their job done. Middle office is more kind of the support functions. So if money needs to be collected as a result of a trade, if something goes wrong, then there's all these sort of teams that manage all those processes and manage risk, and they also need systems, but they're not as mission critical necessarily or as complex. And then you've got external, which is essentially what I would say clients use. So for example, if you're an investment bank and you offer some businesses the ability to trade foreign exchange, then you would actually give them the client-facing platform that they can actually send orders from the comfort of their own home or business. They don't have to call you. They can actually do that. So essentially, it's a self-service proposition for the customers of the investment bank. Looking in a bit more detail, so this is, like I said, a representative kind of trading platform. There's a lot of information. It's very dense. There's a lot of visual cues people need to sort of get about prices and alerts and news and so on. And imagine you've got this in front of you and also 5 other screens, all right? So you think about cognitive limits, you think about attention span, you think about using visual cues and auditory, sort of audio cues as well. It's really interesting. There's a lot of complexity that as designers you try and simplify because you walk in and you think, but realistically, how much of this do you really need? Do you need it all the time? Do you need it sometime? If you had to choose 5 things from here that you could keep, what would that be? And to be honest, you do realize that sometimes, especially when you're looking at legacy systems, people do start breaking it down and say, you know what, actually that whole panel, I don't use that often. And then you realize that there's really interesting ways with a more clever UI that you can start hiding panels and you can have more clever way of sort of customizing things because a lot of these systems are fairly old. In terms of, like I said, more kind of support, middle office, there's a lot of dashboards involved. People want to have an aggregated view and they want to have, the key KPIs and metric. So there's the trading platforms, but you also find yourself working on trying to visualize information, critical information in various ways. This, I guess, is just a representative sort of work queue. There's a lot of these workflow tools that people use to kind of handle exceptions with something that broke along the way. And again, this is more of a support function, but there's also a lot of work in this, mainly because of regulation and compliance. A lot of those workflows have been changing dramatically, and they need people like you and I to kind of basically design them in a way that makes sense, because sometimes those workflows are completely changed. And like I said, for the external systems, They're a bit more simple because these are not necessarily sort of professional users, so things are a bit more basic, simple, allowing people to self-serve effectively. In terms of the trading sort of floor, as I mentioned, we are looking at very sort of data-rich, sort of mission-critical systems. There's sort of high sort of pressure. If you're dealing with a hedge fund, for example, as a salesperson, you have to close the deal in 10 seconds. Because prices in certain sort of cases, if the market is very volatile, it moves in a split second. And it really makes a difference. And even the way that they talk on the phone, even the way that they get kind of the instructions on Bloomberg chat, it's almost sort of 4 words. And it's this sort of almost sort of secret language you have to sort of get your head around because there's no time. And obviously it's very demanding cognitively. And human errors, as I said, can have grave consequences. These are some examples. I'll let you sort of soak them in. What happens when you fat finger in investment banking? These things happen, right? And when you think about how do you place buttons, how big is the text, how small is the text, what icons are you using? You don't have time for tooltips. How many speed bumps are you going to put along the way? So for example, some trading platforms allow you to switch from one-click trading to two-click trading. So if you're a bit sort of trigger happy, or if you want to have that extra confirmation, you can switch it to a two-click trading mode. Some cases you can say, give me a pop-up, are you sure? But for example, again, if you're dealing with a very volatile currency, for example, that extra step of, are you sure you want to trade X, Y, Z? By the time you click yes, you've lost money because the market has moved, and those things happen. So those sort of issues raise a lot of questions from a design perspective. What is the user journey? How safe is it? Are you designing for, sort of a highway, or do you allow people to kind of stop, have a look? What is the confirmation that you provide? What I found to be really interesting as well about working in this environment, and I think that may be different from kind of retail and wealth to some extent, is that in retail and commercial banking, there's a huge focus on the customer experience. Everyone talks about it. Everyone knows it. If you have a really poor online experience, you're going to go on Twitter and you're going to basically say, oh, that bank's sort of online experience is not very good. So everyone is aware of it. There's huge understanding. But you go to investment banking and especially internal systems, and you got a captive audience. This is a system, you're going to use it. You don't like it, leave. But that doesn't really happen, right? So a lot of these systems are designed internally by BAs and developers that create applications in Excel. For example, the number of times when I met people and they said, we have this tool, and you ask them, can we have a look at it? And they talk about this amazing application, but what they show you is an Excel with 25 tabs and all these macros. And guess what? There's one guy that wrote those macros 20 years ago, and that's the only reason why he's still working in the bank. And that's true, because if Jerry leaves, really. And I think that I can tell you a true story. In one of the world's leading tier 1 banks, someone told me, at any given point in time, we're always one spreadsheet away from a disaster. It's true. And that's the environment, right? So if you come as a designer, this is really good because the bar is quite low. And once you start sketching UIs that are much more modern, hey, I told you it's going to be fun. But we come with sensibilities that we can bring from fintech and from other industries. And you start doing the mock-ups and the prototypes. And it's such a huge leap. I mean, and you show it to people that, to be fair, for years, had to kind of go through all these clunky systems written in sort of VB and using sort of punch cards in some cases. You can really make a difference very, very quickly. In terms of design research, I mean, this is kind of my favorite bit. Like I said, I was an academic for a long time, and I really, really enjoyed doing the user testing and doing the observations and talking to people and interview. And for me, UX is all about empathy. It's about meeting people, understanding what they do, what they like doing, what they don't like doing, and then coming up with a design that tries to meet those needs and anxieties. What I found to be quite challenging, I would say, is the fact that in investment banking, especially front office, you got very limited access to users, and that's for a number of reasons. First of all, they're extremely busy. As I said, they sometimes, they have lunch in front of their 5 monitors. They can't really go away for a day workshop, do an offsite. I used to do sort of lab studies here, and obviously the thought of getting a trader to come in, obviously we can't take them away from the machine, but also replicating that environment is impossible. And also the information is very sensitive. So even if I could bring a Tobii sort of goggles, they would say you can't do that because all the information is highly sensitive. It's all client information, proprietary market information. So you realize that you're quite limited. Another thing as well that I found is what I call analysis fatigue. A lot of these banks always run these change projects. They always have some, sort of headless BA running around asking questions about people's day in the life every 2 months. So by the time you show up and you want to understand what someone is doing in foreign exchange trading, they would tell you straight away, I told someone 2 months ago, go and figure it out. So you have to kind of work within those constraints, because they're kind of getting annoyed after a while if too many people come and ask them about what they do, and that's just the reality. And also, you may not think about it, but sometimes end users are deliberately kept away from the project, because that project is going to have a profound impact on their day-to-day work. And if they're going to find out about that too soon, it's going to cause an issue. All right? So that's what we call expectation management. Right? So a lot of times you do try and, can I talk to Bob, the trader? No, you can't. You can talk to Sally, who's in change, or so on and so on. So it can be frustrating, and you have to kind of work with sort of proxy users and kind of see how you can really operate and still kind of come up with the insights and come up with the ideas. A very useful advice that someone told me when I started is find someone nice and really hold on to them. It can be a bit of a ruthless environment. People are very busy. Again, you're the third guy this month that's asking me about my day in the life. So if you do find a person that's more accommodating, a bit more patient, maybe, I don't know, he kind of see the fear in your eyes when you're looking at his sort of 6 screens, definitely sort of hold on to them. I had quite a few. Again, a shame about the quality, but what I do a lot of times when I encounter a new kind of business domain, in this case it was sort of collateral management, start to sort of mind map it, do the research, always look at what you can. You're not going to become an investment banker in 2 days or even sort of 2 years, but this is something that I like to visualize things. Again, it's a mind map, trust me, even though you can't see it. This was for operational risk. Essentially, I just spent 2 days Googling Wikipedia, getting a book on Amazon, came to the kickoff meeting with this big poster. The client was completely amazed. He thought, where did you get that? Did we do that? And I was like, no, this was just a bit of homework. I got a few of the keywords, a few of the concept, but at least you've got a conversation starter that you can start looking into. I mentioned sort of multiple sort of monitors, and obviously you think about screen real estate and where is your app going to fit? The mistake a lot of people do, they design for full screen, but guess what? Your app is going to be number 25 in that jungle. And I can guarantee you it's not going to be used full screen. So what size are you designing for? And you're realizing that, for example, responsive design can be very useful, because maybe someone's going to use your app narrow mode, even though it's never going to be on a mobile phone or an iPad sort of breakpoint, because they're going to put it next to the Bloomberg pricing. Anyway, when I was in one of the banks the first time, I was so impressed by the fact that there was all these sort of multi-monitor configurations that every time I went to the bathroom, I documented one of them. And I wanted to kind of basically do a survey of all those combinations. It looked a bit dodgy. You see this guy walking around, taking notes on the trading floor. People are very sensitive. But all I really wanted to do was look at all the configurations. Some of them have vertical, some horizontal. Some have them as a combination. Oh, you can see actually better on that one. So some people got the sort of the smaller monitors, and you basically realize that people that have to go through long lists of tables, they would have the vertical screen, because it's less sort of, you can actually get more information. And you start thinking again, how is my application going to fit in this environment? What screen resolution, what screen orientation am I designing for? So for example, when I sit with users, I usually take my sort of pencil case and I say, show me what you got. How do you kind of order your screen? What is the layout? How do you kind of personalize your applications? And these are 2 examples from a project, for example. And again, when you start presenting your work and you're thinking, where is this going to fit? Because if you're only going to show them this really cool wireframe, sort of, I don't know, sort of 1240 by 10, sort of 80, like that, it doesn't really going to fit. So I usually bring an actual mock-up of something like that. You take sort of 4 pieces of carton, make them black, and put your application there in different sizes. You bring it up, it's about this big. And it's actually almost like a physical mock-up of that sort of workstation. I thought this was really cool when I saw that. This is like a sort of like a rear view mirror that traders have on the edges of their workstations, so they can see if anyone is walking behind them, taking notes of the screen configuration, right? Yeah. So again, you think about anxiety levels, you think about the cognitive state of these people, right? This is quite interesting. And you can actually buy this on Amazon if you want to be that person in the office. In terms of conceptual design, like I said, my view is that as designers, we can make a difference. Usually, if you go to investment banks and large organizations, this is how requirements look like. like I said, they send an army of BAs to compile a BRD for a year. By the time they finish, all those requirements are irrelevant. They end up developing a lot of these Visio sketches and diagrams that no one understands, apart from the BA that wrote them. And then they showcase those examples and try and get buy-in for a project. So my view is you can do that eventually if you want to, really. But what I usually do are things like that we all know and love, right? We do the journeys, we do the mock-ups, we do the storyboards. We try and simplify things, break them down, and saying, okay, but what does that start of day routine for a trader look like? Can you actually articulate the steps? It's not rocket science. It really isn't. But the challenge is to get people to buy into it. And I am happy to actually say that I found it to be much easier than you might think. So I'm closing one project now in Canary Wharf. I've got now one in the city that is all around creating these type of storyboards and these type of engagements to allow a business to conceptualize and have a proof of concept within 6 weeks of what this application and what this proposition is going to look like. At the end, this is what it might look like. So you get a whole set of these storyboards that are very visual, very narrative based, and people love them. They're much more engaging, they're much more creative, and this is what we do daily, right? So if you think that you can't do that in investment banking, you're wrong. People are really craving this kind of output, this kind of sort of fresh perspective. Anyway, that's been from my experience up to now. A few more points. Legacy systems, obviously something that we always have to bear in mind. A lot of good ideas that we come up with are sometimes basically sort of hampered purely because this is what the bank systems might look like. I think some of them still have hamsters running some of them. So you do get a lot of sort of pushback in terms of we can't do this, we can't do that, but it's still worth trying because even if you still have a good proposition that people buy into, you can actually start to get that sort of struggle to actually get something to work. What I want to show you now is just a process that I developed when I just started on my first project. I was, like I said, new to the industry, didn't really know how to tackle the design process. I was looking at something quite complex, and the first thing that I thought about was something that I recognized, which was an actual sort of audio editing sort of app. I don't know how many of you kind of record music at home in your bedroom and so on, but this is what I was using at the time, and I thought there's some similarities, you know, the data density and all the charts and all that. So as an exploration with the client, what I did was basically saying, you know what, just as a creativity exercise to try and think a bit more sort of, I would say, out of the box, let's take all those apps and strip away all the content and think if that could be used in some way in the context of what we're designing. And you can also see how you got the Bloomberg keyboard and the kind of the audio sort of Cubase keyboard, which is quite interesting observation. So this is the original UI, and I just sort of photoshopped out all the text. So it's completely agnostic of the domain. And we kind of went through quite a few of these to try and see, will that make sense? You know, could this be the price? Could this be where you can adjust the volatility and the strike and the value date and the trade date? And you just basically, this was, again, first experience, will any of this stick? This was another example. And it's quite interesting to see how when you show someone a UI that's completely agnostic of content, they start, yeah, that could be actually the cash flow, because if that's my fixed and that's my float, then that can be, yeah, I can see where you're going with this. So we ended up doing that. So I took sort of Pro Tools, we stripped it down, and then started looking at how that might work in terms of currency pairs and visualization, zooming in and out. And within 3 days, we had that sort of mock-up, right? So that was really fun. Usually, this is what you get from SMEs in the bank, right? So you go to a meeting, you get this as an explanation of this is what we do. And what I then do and try and kind of always very quickly visualize is turn that into this. So help them focus, help them understand, okay, but you come in the morning, you've got your coffee, you've got your Red Bull. What is the first thing you do? What's the second thing you do? Do you do it every day or some days? Is this ad hoc? Is this routine? You then start, you might want to look at that one, right? You then start sketching, you start iterating through ideas, you're looking at different ideas and ways of visualizing data. And then within, obviously, days, hopefully not weeks, you have something much more mature that you can start testing and showing and so on. But that's a process. I think that, like I said, if people are shown what the potential is and how quickly we can work sometimes to simplify things, they definitely buy into it. The last few things I'm going to talk about, if I've got 5 minutes? Yeah, good. First of all, use of colors, which I think is fascinating in banking. How many of you are colorblind? Yay, yeah, I'm one of those. So in banking and investment banking especially, the whole kind of meaning of red and green obviously is very dominant, and it's used a lot. Obviously from an accessibility perspective, the guideline is not to use color alone to signify meaning, so you also get kind of directions and arrows and so on. I've seen some trading platforms that actually use sort of yellow and blue, so I think there's much more kind of awareness and recognition of that, but it's definitely something worth considering. My rule, every time I told a client or a colleague that I was colorblind, and they laughed for some reason. Basically, I told them, look, this is cool because if I can see it, everyone can see it, right? So you basically get the accessibility tester for free. Every pixel matters. Obviously, in sort of more retail, commercial aspects, we're talking about, white space, let the UI breathe. If you get that, pretty much, someone's going to say, well, you can put another kind of pricing feed there. You can put another kind of news alert there, and so on. So I think it's finding the balance. I mean, we don't want to sort of simplify things. I mean, I've seen some attempts where people try to present an investment banking professional front office system as something that looks too retail, and it really puts people off. Because obviously they think I can have more information, I'm not going to scroll, I'm not going to click through all those things. So I think, again, it's finding the balance. You don't necessarily want to replicate those legacy, ultra busy systems, but you want to be smart about it in terms of how you allow people to customize information, toggle between a grid view and a data viz view. Using data is very important. You're talking about users that, if you think about sort of fat fingering and where's the decimal place, they're very, very sort of sensitive and aware of data. And if you try and use sort of lorem ipsum, it's not going to fly. If you're just going to have a trade sort of list where you just copy paste everything, it's not going to work. But the tricky thing is that in order to do sort of testing with real mock data, or it's not a real mock data, but realistic mock data, it's very difficult because you need to kind of source it, you need to sometimes have enough of it, and the system has to be mature enough to be able to cope with it. So it is tricky. What I ended up doing was devising my own kind of trade data lorem ipsum generator in Excel. Yeah. So you can see that basically what I ended up doing is that in a lot of projects you have to kind of have lists of trades that people kind of book and they can use and so on. There's a component called a trade blotter. And every time I had to create one, and whether it's Illustrator or sort of Sketch or whatnot, it's very tedious to create all this. So I ended up just creating all these little formulas in Excel that kind of generate random sort of dates and random client names and random sort of amounts, and then you can just sort of copy paste all that into a table, whether it's within sort of Xure or other sort of tools. So quite handy. Another thing that was a bit of a surprise to me is the fact that these applications need to be keyboard friendly. I don't think many of us have used this portion of the keyboard since the 80s, right? But you'll actually be surprised that a lot of people that spend a lot of their day doing data entry, they would just use that. And if they have to do this and kind of keep switching to the mouse, they're not going to like it. And what I found is that there were a lot of prototypes and examples where we thought, let's put like a cool slider. There's a cool slider and you can do this and you can see the values. But for them, the fact that you had to constantly kind of switch from entering the details and tabbing and then switching to the mouse. So the rule of thumb is you can do all that, but also consider how you can do the data entry purely using the keyboard. Think about the tab index. What is the tabbing order of this stuff? It's not just accessibility, it's just the way that these people operate. Numbers and typography, also something to bear in mind. Like I said, on one hand, the demand is we want to see a lot of information on the screen, which means that sometimes the size of the fonts gets smaller. But look what happens in some fonts, in some cases, if it's too small. You start sort of basically getting confused between a 0 and an 8. Where's a decimal place? And it's also sort of striking that balance. You want to have a lot of useful information on the screen, but at the same time, if there's a slight sort of risk that it's getting sort of too small or that people are not able to sort of enlarge it, that's something that you want to sort of be conscious of. Data visualization. I think a lot of people that go into sort of complex applications and kind of investment banking, they think, yes, I can have my 3D sphere with a heat map everywhere. That's okay. You can suggest that. What I found is that a lot of times it's the simple or the simpler visualizations that people really need, because what the real pain point is having the data available. So because of data availability, accuracy, real time, sometimes all they need is a simple sort of bar chart or a pie chart. They don't necessarily need the full universe represented like that. I found a lot of times people just look at it, they say, I would print it and hang it in the kitchen, but I can't really use it at work, because what is this telling me? What I sometimes do is basically offer two modes. You can have the viz view, and then you can have the kind of the under the hood tabular view, because in some cases people do need to kind of sort, they need to filter, they need to do things that are not just sort of pattern sort of recognition or sort of trend analysis. So you need to be careful about that. The other thing, and this is almost the one before the end, is that Excel plays a huge role in the day-to-day lives and work of these people. Everything is done in Excel. Everything is downloaded to Excel. Everything is exported from Excel. And you have to kind of bear that in mind in terms of people's mental models. You have to think, are we going to recreate Excel in the browser with this app? Or is this just a step that, you know what, Excel is part of the journey, and that's okay. You know, you can say when you do the storyboarding, this system scope is going to be taking you up to this point, and here you might have to download it to Excel, do some things, and then re-upload it, if that happens to be the case. Because a lot of information that gets sent from clients and so on is usually in a spreadsheet. And like I said, the last point is always think about the multi-monitor sort of workstation. We actually designed, in my previous job, a responsive trading platform, which was very interesting and challenging. The view was that it's not meant for devices. It was really around what happens if someone minimizes this application and has it on the side. It's only going to show the notifications. Or if you have it in a sort of an iPad breakpoint, what is it going to show? And it was that sort of awareness and understanding that no one is going to use this full screen, very rarely. And that's quite interesting sort of thing to bear in mind. And also how you make your interface modular. The first request you're going to get from users is always, can I detach it? Because I want to put it here, and I want to put this one there. So what sort of framework you're using for the UI, how things communicate between windows, that's also something to bear in mind. And with that, I'll say thank you, and hopefully you enjoyed the presentation.